thought we could do a little stroke education to educate everybody on exactly what's been going on in Papa's case. So first we're going to kind of talk about stroke. So there are two types of strokes that I've talked about. One is an ischemic stroke, which is a blood clot. And the second kind is a bleed, and that's also called hemorrhagic. So Papa ended up having a TIA, which was a very, very small clot that eventually either dislodged or his body dissolved on its own. What's important too to talk about when we're talking about the brain is the difference in arteries versus veins. So in the brain, we talk about arteries because arteries carry oxygenated blood from the heart to the body. And if you happen to have a blockage, like a blood clot, then you're not going to carry that oxygen needed for the brain. The brain can't survive if it doesn't have oxygen, which is why arteries are such a big deal. Veins are the opposite, so they carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart to pick up new oxygen. So always talking about arteries with the vein. And in Papa's case, we have the vertebral artery. So the vertebral artery kind of comes along the back of the neck and can supply, it's a huge artery, so it can supply a lot of areas of the brain. And what can happen is if you have high cholesterol or issues, you can develop these little yellow spots, which represents plaque. That can also be called atherosclerosis, which is just a fancy word for plaque that builds up in our arteries and can restrict blood flow. So if I can kind of zoom in. So if you have an abundance of plaque, that can make it really hard for blood to pass through, and eventually blood can get caught in that and cause a clot. And that's not good because that means that everything upstream of that clot isn't getting perfused by that main artery. Now, it might get oxygen from other arteries that might supply the brain, but this is such a big artery that it causes a big issue if it clots off. Now, in Papa's case, we saw that when he had a clot, he had issues with the language part of his brain. There are two language parts of the brain which are important to note. You have Broca's area and then Wernicke's area, and those are just two different areas that control language processing within the brain and control what you say, how you write, how you express it, and how you hear others. Now let's talk a little bit more about that aphasia. So aphasia is a fancy word for an issue with the language centers of your brain in Broca and Wernicke's area. There are two types of aphasia that we can see. You have expressive, which is when someone just can't get the words out. They just can't come up with what they're trying to say. And that's kind of what Papa experienced from my understanding. And then you also have receptive aphasia, which is different. That's not understanding what others are saying to you. So a way that you can test for this is you can tell someone, show me 2 thumbs up, and they won't be able to do it because they just don't understand what you're saying. You can also have both of those, which is called global aphasia, when you exhibit both expressive and receptive aphasia. So we're going to talk about preventing strokes too, a little stroke education for Papa when he gets out. Blood thinners are important because blood thinners are what's going to keep that blood moving up that vertebral artery. It's going to thin it out so it doesn't get caught in between those plaques. Lowering your cholesterol. All of these yellow spots are plaque that are caused by high cholesterol. So the hope is that by taking this Crestor that's being prescribed, we can get rid of some of that and prevent it from building back up. Because if you just build back up more and more plaque, that plaque alone is going to cause a blockage that won't enable blood to pass through. And then keeping your blood pressure low. Take your blood pressure medications, monitor your blood pressure. That's just a really basic way to prevent your stroke risk. And then also remember, the left side of your brain affects the right side of your body, and then the right side of your brain affects the left side of your body. So since we know that Papa had issues with the language processing centers of his brain, those are on the left side of the brain, specifically Wernicke's area. We know that if his stroke had worsened or persisted longer, he eventually may have shown right-sided weakness or numbness and tingling that I think he's had in his fingers before. And then also some other things that I didn't write on here that are important to know. Strokes can affect your coordination, and your vision. So it's really important if you think you're having a stroke, don't drive. I've seen a lot of patients that have had wrecks because they thought something was wrong, but they got in their car anyway, and they couldn't see out of one eye or their coordination was off, and so they wrecked their car. So that's another thing too, just looking out for those signs and symptoms. and calling someone if you think that there's a problem. I hope this helps.